Welcome to SQL City. I'm Steve Jones. I run SQL Server Central. I started that site about a decade ago. And Redgate actually purchased my site about 6 years ago, so now I work for Redgate Software. I still run SQL Server Central, and I'm an evangelist as well. So today we're going to talk about version control and databases. This is kind of the first of 3 talks that we give in a row where we're trying to talk to you a little bit about how you can better develop and manage with your databases and then deploy software in a better way. So I'll talk about version control. The next talk by David Atkinson, I think, is going to talk about continuous integration, automated builds, and then we'll do a deployment talk with Grant and David Semler, who was just up here. So, very simple goals here. We really want to just talk about why version control is important, and then different ways that we can do this, and then finally flowing things together in a team, which is where we get the synergies and value. So how many of you use version control for application code, .NET code, front code? So lots of you didn't raise your hand, which is bad. Hopefully you're just tired. How many of you use version control for your database code? So quite a few. That's kind of good. That's good to see. Right. So you believe in this stuff. I don't know why you're sitting here. I guess you don't want to see yours in the other room, but that's fine. Version control is, it's almost required for anybody that does software development. These days, I think, if you don't use version control, there are plenty of developers that do feel you should not be hired, or you should be fired, or they don't want to work with you. Version control is easy, and it's really not too much trouble, even for very small programs. It's something that you want to be ubiquitous in your environment, that every project, every application, every time you're doing something, you use version control. Even those of you that say you don't use version control, you probably do version control things, you just don't realize it. Even if you're working alone, you do need version control. And Troy Hunt is an MVP that does a lot of security work, and he's a C# developer as well. And he's written a number of things about software development. And one of his big quotes here is that everything has to be in version control. That is our single source for keeping all of the code. That allows us to have this base from where we can build it, and it's very important we do it. If you don't believe Troy Hunt, Jeff Atwood, who started Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow. Anybody ever use those sites? Probably quite a few of you. He thinks it's important not just for your application code, but also for your database code. They run Stack Exchange on SQL Server, and they version control absolutely everything that they do, both in the database and in the application side. Maybe the best reason of all is that we make mistakes. Are any of you perfect when you write code? I'm certainly not. I'm not a great developer, but we always make mistakes, or we always go down the wrong path, and we have to fix a bug, or we have to undo something that we've done. And having version control makes that much easier for us to do. Now, we don't have to be perfect. Hopefully none of you work in a job like this where you do have to be perfect. You can only make one mistake in this job, so you're aware. We're allowed to make mistakes, and version control allows us the flexibility to make mistakes. So really I want to show you how easy it is to kind of get started doing database version control. So let's pop over here to somewhere. On this, I've got a virtual machine here, and on this virtual machine, I've installed Subversion. Now Subversion is a version control system. It's free. You can download it, install it. There are many other version control systems out there. Some of you may use TFS from Microsoft. Some of you may use SourceSafe. Sorry if you're still using SourceSafe. There are better ways to do version control. There's Subversion, there's Git, there's Mercurial, there's CVS, there's all kinds of systems out there. A lot of them, there's quite a few of them that are free. They're easy to install. This is just download, install, it's free. This is actually the Tortoise version, which gives me this GUI. You can see it here, I've got a couple of projects under source control here. But I want to add a new project to my version control system. So, I'm going to go here in Management Studio, and I've got a script here that's going to create a database. Nothing magic, I'm just going to create this database. It's going to add tables, it's going to add code, data, procedures, all the normal stuff that we expect. So let me run this, and when this runs, I should see I've got a new database here. Assume my VM is awake. And I've got tables and things in here. Right? All the kind of stuff that we normally see. Whether you're creating things from scratch or you have an existing system, you have things like this. So how do I get this into version control? I have a couple of different ways that I can do this. I want to show you 2 ways that I can do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rerun this script, and I'm going to replace Steve with manual, just so that I can create another database. And then I'm going to run this again. And I'll get a second database here. Manual. Okay? Everybody with me? Anybody confused? All right, good. So probably some of you have done this at some point or another. You've gone over here and you've looked for this generate scripts task. And what this does is it allows me to script out all of my objects. You may do this for deployments if this is how you do deployments. We got tools to sell you. We really do. So I'll help you. I'm going to script everything to its own file just so that I can keep track of it. And if I go in here, I have a manual folder. Let's just run this stuff. Very easy to do, just a few clicks. It's running the SMO scripting objects against the database. If I go to my documents, and where's my manual? We'll see I get all these files that we just created in here. They all have today's data. They do. These are my tables, my stored procedures, all the schema stuff that I have. And if I look at any of these, it's just create table statements, right? Everybody get that? All right. So I have all the stuff in the file system. How do I add this to Subversion? Well, I'm going to add a folder here. In this case, I'm going to pick that folder where I just did that stuff. And when I add this, it's going to add things to my source control system. Now please always use comments when you use source control because your coworkers will thank you. Actually, you will thank yourself because comments are for you 6 months down the road when you go back and try to figure out why this piece doesn't exist. You can see I have a new folder here. I, in fact, now have a database in source control. Okay? There's all of my stuff. If I look at it, it's just the code that I did. Okay? However, that's a little bit of a manual process, right? That allows me to take my initial database and stick everything in and keep track of it. There's actually an easier way to do it, and at Redgate we came up with a better way to do this because we found this to be a problem. We actually needed to do this for ourselves as well. We have this SQL source control add-in which integrates into Management Studio. So the same type of thing that you could do with SMO objects or PowerShell or anything else, we've kind of done here for you to try to make this easy. In this case, I can link my database to source control. And you can see on the left-hand side, I have all these different source control systems. I'm going to use Subversion, and I'm in fact going to put it in a separate place just so I can keep track of what I'm doing today. So let's create a new project. Simple talk. And I'm going to take this path at the very top. This is a file path to the local system. It's for Subversion, and I stick it right here. I link this together. What's going to happen is the tool is going to just do like all the scripting objects. It's going to link everything together. It's going to get all this code. If I now look in my commit changes, because I haven't committed anything to source control, I've kind of linked it together. But you'll see I have all my objects here from my database that are in my database on the left-hand side. They're not in source control on the right-hand side. So if I come down to the bottom, you can see this is database, and the pane on the other side is source control. Nothing there. So I can commit this stuff. So let's do that. And again, we always want to use good comments. This is probably not the best comment, but for the sake of this demo, I'm going to use it. Commit everything in there. And if I come to my folder, I've got a folder structure. And if I look inside any of these, I have, once it updates, I've got code. I've got all of my stuff. Now, there's nothing magic about what we're doing, right? The same thing that I did manually, I did automatically with a tool. The tool made it a little bit easier. I'm doing essentially the same thing. I'm sticking all my stuff together. I've seen people that have actually written their own routines to separate out all the objects into source control just like this and load things in there. But what about working with stuff that I need to work with? So I need to let me say I need to add a table. What can I do? Well, the easy thing to do is just create a table. So let's say I need to do advertisements. And I just created a table, all right? How do I get this in source control? Well, what I really need to do is then save this script. And this is, it's not hard to do this. I'm going to save it here. I actually worked with SourceSafe years and years ago, and we had a bunch of developers, and this is exactly what we did. We added code, we added procedures or tables or anything else. We would just save the script, and then when we would come to our source control system in Visual SourceSafe, we could just go ahead and add that particular file. Where did I put that? Not a great name. Let's rename that actually so that we don't mess this up. Where is that? No. If I didn't spell that right, then that's too bad. Well, I did. So, there's a better comment there. And I've got my new table added in. And that manually checking stuff in, it's not hard. Everybody can learn to do it. It takes a few months to train most developers to do that. But they can learn. They are capable of learning to change their habit. Sometimes it takes a big stick, but you can get it done. And we did this for years. If we had to make changes, we had the opposite problem. So if I had to make changes, I would actually have to check stuff out. And in this case, let me check this out to my same folder just so that I can keep track of it. My Management Studio and SimpleTalk, we'll check it out there. Yeah, that's right, check out. And if I look in that folder, you'll see that I have this object. I can go into Management Studio and I can open up that object and I can say, all right, let's add something else to this. Oops. Address is just a horrible field. And then I can run it and it doesn't work, right? Why doesn't it work? It says to be altered. Right? We don't have create or alter in SQL Server. But that's not a big deal though, right? I can just alter this procedure. I can run this. I can save it. And then if I go back to my folder, periodically, you'll see that I have a little red icon from Subversion, which tells me that I've got a difference between what's on disk and what's in source control. And I want to sync these up, so I just commit this, added address column to result set. Let's just make it a good comment for good, show you a good habit. If I do this, now if I look at my source control system, let's go by revision. Sorry. The one thing about Tortoise is that it's slow to update. I will actually see in here that it's got my code that I changed and it has the alter in there. So if I need to check this out to do any work, I can do that, right? Not that hard, slightly cumbersome though. What else could I do? Well, again, we've tried to automate this thing and make it better. So if I were to take my table, where's my table? Let's run this in my source control database, other database. So I execute that. And if I were to actually then look at my tab here, I'll actually see that it finds my new table, as we would expect. It's not in source control. So I can then add that here as well. Commit that. And let's change that store procedure. So if I want to change that store procedure, this is probably what most of you do on a daily basis. You come in here and you pick modify and you say, hey, I want to change this. Run this. And I'd see this is here as well. That now I would see the changes here without having to do the save, without having to remember to go anywhere else. I've got it done automatically. Both those changes will appear in here. So my get contacts is here. The code with my address. The only thing you notice here is I have create procedure here. I don't have alter, even though I did alter that procedure. The reason is we actually run SQL compare in the background, use that same technology, and we do a comparison, and then we build you the create script so that at the head of your source control system, at the latest version, you always have the ability to build all of your objects, that you don't have to go backwards in time to figure out where did I first build this and what are all the alters in between. We actually give you the whole thing. So for tables, for anything else, if I were to add a column to a table, I'd see the same thing. I'd see the create table statement. All right? Any questions? Everybody happy? Everybody bored? I'm just asking. All right. There's all kinds of reasons to use version control. You know, it's fairly easy to set up. You know, you can check in and check out manually. You can use a tool like we provide. You can write your own automated tools to do so. But it's important that you have it for a number of reasons. Backup and restore is the easy one. And if you lose your code, your machine crashes or something, you can pull out this code, get back to where you were. The other thing is undoing things. Probably all of you at some point have written code that didn't work correctly. You know, you realize there was a bug or it didn't solve the problem that you needed to solve, and then you have to undo that code. Sometimes it can be problematic or cumbersome to undo code when you're talking about a lot of files. It's probably more prevalent in front-end applications, but in back-end applications, imagine I add a column, then I start to alter all kinds of stored procedures or functions or other things to deal with that, and then I realize that was really not what I wanted to do, and I want to go back and do something different. Undoing all those changes at database level can be a real pain. Source control allows you to very easily do that. If I want to go look at the history of anything that I've done, I can see that. If I were to go back, once I figure out where, there it is. If I were to look at this procedure in here, I actually have the ability to see the versions that I've entered with the comments. I could get the code, I could do a comparison, I could do any of that stuff. I can do the same thing here if I were to actually look in my system. I can see here, I can see exactly what's done. You know, we showed it for you. But it allows me to very quickly go through here and say, do I want to get rid of things? If I wanted to, at the very bottom, say I can update my database's version using SQL compare. So I could actually pick a version, if I were to scroll down to a different version, and I could say, update my database and undo all of these changes. So if I had a number of changes, I could very quickly undo them. How many of you have seen code change and then it doesn't work and nobody claims it as their change? We've probably all done that. We've probably done it to ourselves. I know I probably have too. It's not so much blaming here, but it's a really great exercise that helps you figure out when things have gone wrong and how do we fix them and how do we teach people to not do something in the future. You know, if you use it to go yell at people, it becomes a tool that nobody wants to use. But if you use it to actually improve your development process, it works really well. The other thing that becomes really valuable is be able to branch and merge. A lot of us work on applications that we're working on this application, we're making changes over time, and then we realize we've released something that has a bug in it. Somebody says, hey, I need you to patch this bug. Meanwhile, we've continued on development, and we've gone forward in other areas. It's not so easy to build a patch for a previous version. All of us get patches from Microsoft, for all kinds of software all the time. If you ever have to go back and patch a version you've released while you're doing future development, you'll realize very quickly that you need version control to do that. Otherwise, it becomes very, very cumbersome to make this happen. Okay? But ultimately, the whole idea of version control is reducing the risk. We want to reduce the risk that we can't build our project, that our software is in an uncontrolled state, and that we don't know what's going on. The best example I can give of this is years ago, I came to Denver and I worked at a financial services company. And we had SourceSafe. They were using SourceSafe for database code and for application code. What we found is that people had checked out they had checked out the project to their own individual machine and never checked it back in. And then they built off various machines at various times. So when we looked at the database, we looked at the application, we never had a central place where we had all of our code. And so when bugs would crop up, it was a nightmare trying to patch things. We would deploy patches that didn't work because it contained code that was at a different revision from the code that existed on the system, you know, other than what we had patched. And so we had all these problems because we didn't have a good source control system. The risk level for us of touching any code was very high. And we were actually afraid to patch the software, which became a problem and eventually the company failed. When you have version control, it really does reduce the amount of risk that you have in not being able to keep control of your software and deploy patches, to deploy new versions, and to meet the goals or the needs of the organization that's building the software. All right. Now, years ago I actually did this before version control, where we zipped up all of our code every day and we stuck it in a folder. Monday went in Monday folder, Tuesday folder, Wednesday folder. You guys understand? Probably some of you have actually saved a piece of code as my store procedure 2.SQL or my ASPS page 2.ASPX. Anybody ever done that? That's version control. That's a crappy way to do version control. It's an uncontrolled way. But that's what version control is. That's what it is. We all do it. We all do it constantly. We do it with our Word documents, with emails, all kinds of stuff. We do it. If you're going to do it, please do something. All right? If you don't want to use Subversion or any of the other tools, please do something. At least do this. As long as you don't have to go back more than a week, you're fine. If you have to go back more than a week, you're usually in trouble. But ultimately, what we really want to do is we want to automate things as much as possible, because automation just makes life easier. The easier things are, the more often people will use them. That's one of the reasons we have the Redgate tool. If you don't want to use our tool, you could write your own with PowerShell or SMO DMO. There's any number of ways you can script out objects in a database in your application code. There's any number of tools you could use to kind of zip up files and keep versions and then diff them. It can be cumbersome. I would really recommend you use some kind of version control system because it makes it easier, but please do something. Right? If you can automate it, automate it. Does anybody read Scott Allen? His blog? He's a great developer. He's a really, really well-known developer, and he's had a lot of success in his business. And he writes a lot about software development on the front end, but he also writes about databases as well. And he has these 3 great rules that I would encourage you to read about if you get the chance. It's a great series of posts. He talks about how we always want to follow. We never want to have a shared database for development, because that means that we don't have a sandbox, that any change we make or any change somebody else makes could conflict with changes we're making, could cause problems in our development. Always have a source for your schema, which is version control. That's really where you stick everything. And then always make sure you know what versions of your databases are out there. So if you're deploying code, you have a particular version out there. Now in the deployment manager demo earlier, we have these packages that version your databases. You can choose the number however you want, but it allows us to know at any point in time what the version of the database is. And you can link that to source control so that you could tell what code is actually deployed at any point in time. Now, how many of you use shared databases for development? A few of you. A lot of you. I think it's a horrible idea. I really do. Troy Hunt agrees with me. He thinks it's just an evil thing to do. And I know that some of you, it's not always your choice to do so, but I would really, really make the argument that you should always have a dedicated database for each developer to work on. It can be small. It does not have to have all of the data that's in production. It can just have the schema and objects and just small amounts of data that you've just created for your work, but always have a dedicated database. I know there are valid reasons to use shared databases, administrative reasons, load testing, all kinds of things, but there's no reason that any developer these days needs to work in a shared environment. Not for all of their work. We should always have their own dedicated. We have developer versions of SQL Server, we have developer versions of all the other tools that allow you to work in your own environment and then push those changes forward. Having version control means you can take all the changes you have and merge them with everybody else's changes and then have a shared server. And the ideal is that we have a shared integration server where we can build our database and you can have a copy of production. You can do all the load testing and the query tuning and all the things you need to do on a large database. But every developer still has a small database on their system. Administratively, it's not hard. Please just set your database as a simple mode. It works really, really well. You don't have to do much at all after that. But you can make all your changes, push it to source control, and then integrate that with everybody else's changes. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some more practical things we do. Does anybody have naming standards in their company?
Naming standards?
Yeah, so if you name objects or things. Naming standards are important, I think. And the real reason they're important is because they allow me to convey information to another developer without talking to them and explaining things. Or if I create a new object or a new piece of code, that they kind of understand what's going on based on my naming standard. I don't care what naming standard you pick. I think across the 10 or 15 companies I've worked in, everybody has had a different naming standard. You can choose the ISO naming standards if you want to, but it really doesn't matter. Just be consistent and be lightweight with them. Please don't be oppressive with your naming standard. They should be developed as you need them. You know, if you're not doing CLR work, don't have a CLR naming standard. Just build them as you need them. They should be very quick, easy, and lightly documented. It shouldn't be like a 2-week project for somebody to come up with naming standards. It should be 10 minutes. Hey, how are we going to name views? VW, great. All right, we're good. That's a naming standard. That quick, that easy. The other thing you can do is use tools to help you enforce things. Does anybody here use SQL Cop? Somebody does. So SQL Cop is based on the T-SQL-T testing framework. And that's a framework that allows you to run assertions against code and tell if it meets some standard, essentially. So if you're a developer, you understand what an assertion is. Red Game, we make a product called SQL Test. It's an overlay onto the T-SQL-T framework. T-SQL-T code is just, they're just stored procedures that run, and let me just show you. Really, it's just a stored procedure that has, structure to it, essentially. There's a series of functions and things that you could run that would allow you to test to see if code works. And then at the end, I can give a T-SQL-T fail or an assert or something else that works. SQL Cop is a set of these tests that are maintained at the less-than.com site. And there are all these various tests that allow you to enforce various standards you might want in your database. So if I look over here at my list of tests, which we include with SQL Test, there's a few of them here. I've got, let me find my database. Can't see it today. I've got these tests, so test store procedures name SP underscore, dynamic SQL identity, various things. What these do is they allow me to enforce standards with these store procedures. So let's imagine that I'm a new developer and I go ahead and here's my database. Let's go to this database and I'm going to create a store procedure. Right? And I'm going to create this thing and I'm going to do all kinds of bad stuff that I shouldn't do, like, I don't know, like select star, like SP underscore, all this stuff. Okay? I run this store procedure. I've got it ready to go. If I come to my source control tab, I'll actually see it here. Now before I commit something, when I change my code, what I really should do is I should make sure that it passes all my tests. I want to do some unit testing before I commit it. In this case, I could easily come to SQL Cop and I can run all my tests. And you'll see that in fact, this one fails because it catches that naming standard. And you can do this in policy-based management. You could write your own jobs to look for this. T-SQL-T is a great way to do this stuff. This little add-in, all it does is run the test for you, just runs all these store procedures. You can easily have your own store procedure that runs all these tests yourself. But that allows me to figure out here that I've actually, broken one of the standards that I have. So I can fix this. How can I do this? Well, first thing I would probably do is get rid of that one because I know that that's bad. And then let's say our standard is USB. That's an easy one, right? You do this, and if I run my tests again, they should all pass. The nice thing about using SQL Cop is that I can check these in the source control. So every other person on my team can get the same test. If I write a new test and check it in source control, they can pull it out of source control and have it on their system as well. Now, of course, I want an automated way to do that because it's kind of a pain to check stuff in and out. But if I do that, then I have a way to build my testing suite. I can enforce standards. I can test all my other code. And if you watch any of the other sessions later, they'll show you how to do other tests with T-SQL-T that test for performance or for other things that you want to make sure your code actually works. All right, style standards. Does anybody have style standards in their company? Tabs or spaces, or spaces? I hate style standards. One thing I can probably guess is that of the 100 people in this room, there's probably 85 style standards that we all prefer. Style standards are just annoying. They vary by individual. I don't think you should ever have them. I realize that they make code easier to read, but these days we have tools that do that. All the IDEs, they all include ways for us to reformat code to make it much easier. SQL prompt from Redgate, SMS tools pack from Aladdin Project. There's other tools out there that will reformat the code. There's no reason to sit there and enforce these standards. All this does is annoy the next person that comes along that has a different idea of how code should look. As an example, let's say I'm working with my buddy Grant. He's written a stored procedure. How many of you like code formatted like this? Nobody, right? Annoying. My IDE can reformat that code for me, right? Make it much easier for me to read it. How many of you like commas before the columns? You're smart people, I like that. Impressed you guys. I can do that. Most of these tools will allow me to fix that. So if I said, I'm really a smart developer and I like commas at the start, I can reformat the code. If I check this in the source control and the other half of you check it out and hate this, just reformat it. Your desktop will reformat the code for you. There's no reason for you to play around with yelling at developers to say you should have commas first or commas last. Just reformat the code. It's much easier. Yes, sir.
Sorry, what was that? Adding call. I got the SQL copy for that, but the style format controller, is it still SQL cop or?
No, SQL prompt is a Redgate tool.
Right.
SMS tools pack is written by Aladdin Project. He's a SQL Server MVP in Slovenia, Bolivia, somewhere. One of those countries. There are some other ones I don't have. I think there's some other editors out there that do it. I think Embarcadero makes one and other people, but yeah. Visual Studio reformat code, there's added to Visual Studio to do it. Some of those might work on Management Studio depending on what version you have as well. Okay. All right. Anybody work alone? Anybody want to work alone? I've worked alone, I've worked in teams. They both work well. Teams, the whole idea of teams is that if I have 2 developers, I don't want to get twice as much work, right? I want 2.5 times as much work. If I have 10 developers, I want 12 times as much stuff. That only happens when people work together, when you create synergies by working with each other. And really, there's 2 important things here. We have to communicate with each other. We have to make sure that we coordinate our efforts together. Now, communication is important in code. With naming standards, that helps. With comments and source control, those things help. Those are all ways that we can communicate without having to actually go up to somebody and say, hey, what did you do? Okay? Makes it much easier. We don't have to task switch. We don't have to interrupt anybody else. We can figure things out on our own. How many of you send status emails every day or have a daily stand-up? Oh, those are annoying, aren't they? Those are incredibly annoying. Most of the time I get those, I have to do is actually Redgate. We do Agile type work, and for all groups we do Agile work, so even like the accountants do like an Agile thing where they stand up and say, this is what we're doing today. Most of the time I just don't care what everybody else is doing. You know, I have my own set of work to do, and most of the time I just don't care what everybody else is doing. But there are times I do care. I would like to know what's going on. I don't want to dig through a bunch of emails. I don't want to go necessarily find somebody and ask them. If I use something like source control, then it becomes much easier for me to go figure out what's happening. As a matter of fact, that history tab I showed you, a number of our clients, the way they use that is that the developers every morning come in and pop open the history tab and they look at everything that changed in the last day or the last 2 days. And that tells them what's happening in any particular area. They can see if something's relevant to them or if it's going to impact the work that they're doing. It's an easy way to communicate without having to go talk to people. Please talk to people, it's important. Right? If you don't do anything else today, please you should network with other people that are here. These are all people from your local area. Meet 3 people today and say hi. That's that simple, right? Hi. How you doing? What's your name?
Sam.
Sam, I'm Steve. That's networking. You guys can all do it, I guarantee it. It's really not that hard. Please do that. But when I'm developing, a lot of times I don't need that kind of communication. I just need to share that information somehow. Source control allows me to do this. It also allows me to coordinate efforts because I can see what's changing. Our add-in, like Subversion, will tell you when things have changed. so that you can see what else is being worked on. But you could have other ways of doing that. The DMVs will allow you to figure out when objects have been versioned or changed as well, if you have queries that go through there. These are all ways to allow you to just coordinate with other people, get more work done efficiently without having to lose efficiency from all the interactions, from all the unnecessary, hey, what did you change, why did you change this, something else. All right? Again, use automation. I can't stress this enough. Automation becomes really, really important. If you're developing software, you're automating stuff, right? That's why we use computers. Use that same skills, use that same ideas, automate this process. You should try not to be checking in and checking out stuff all the time. Years ago, there was a guy in Colorado named Bill Wonder that wrote a utility that would actually go to a database and script out everything every day and then check it into source set. And it would version it. It would just do a generic comment that said, this is the day we check this stuff in. But it allowed that versioning to happen automatically, and it made it really easy to source control your database. These days we have better ways to do that, but if nothing else, please build your own system, have some way to automate this stuff. And then use your IDEs. Make sure you configure your IDEs so that they work with you, they help you. Use add-ins and tools. There's a ton for Visual Studio. We make some for Manual Studio. There's a few others out there. Use that stuff. It becomes really valuable. So let's look at a little bit of teamwork so I can just show you how this works. I've got my database here. Close this up. I've got all my objects, all the stuff that I have in here. Let's imagine that I hire a new developer. I hire Grant. Did you hire Grant, Mickey?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
I'm
know
not sure
either.
about that.
Yeah. Don't tell Grant I said that. Whoops.
Yeah, you'll get me in trouble.
So let me just create a blank database for Grant. And we can imagine this is on his machine. This is somewhere else. Another system. So I create a blank database here. And it should appear over here if all went well. One of the nice things, I'm just going to use our tool here. As I said, you could do this other ways. But I can link this database to source control. I'm going to link it to the exact same place that I linked mine. Once I do this, there's nothing in Grant's database, so he has nothing to commit. He has nothing to worry about. But he does have all this stuff that's in source control that he is going to need to work on this project. If I come to this tab, now I see the opposite of what I saw earlier, in that everything on the far right is in source control, and there's nothing in the database here. Like with, I could pick and choose objects, all that stuff, but here I'm just going to pull all my objects down. And as I do this, it's actually going to go to the head of the project in source control, all those objects, all the tables, store procedures, functions, views, etc. Get all the create statements, and then run them on this database so they exist. So if I look here, you'll notice the Grant database has got the little green icon. I've got all this stuff in there. Okay, all the tables and store procedures. If we're working on, let's look at that store procedure we did again. Grant needs to modify this. Of course, he doesn't like, he's a comma first guy. Actually, he's not, but let's pretend he is. 2, what else is in here? That's good, we'll just do that. I can run a store procedure. Of course, I should run my tests, here. Grant should run his test and say, I'm not going to run those just for now. Say, I can check this in. It's in my source control system. If I were to go look, I'd see the versioning. Now, if I were to go, if I'm working along, I could actually say, hey, what's changed today? Or what has Grant done? And I would actually see it here. With this add-in, then I can go, all right, well, I guess it's not a bad change. I can download it. Of course, then I don't necessarily want to work with it in this way. Maybe I'm a comma last person. I'm not, but for the sake of this demo, we'll pretend that I am. My IDE on my desktop or my laptop is already configured. So I can fix things like this, and then I can say, all right, well, maybe we need another column in there, and I can check it in as well. And then the same thing, process just goes on. And I do better comments than Grant, as you can see. But having a tool like this, or having source code, allows me to go back and forth and share code back and forth. Yes, sir?
I have a question for the conflict resolution. If both of you make changes at the same time. And the other thing is when you did the reformatting, is the tool smart enough to figure out that there is no actual change? Like you like the commas first, correct the comma stuff.
Okay. So, two things.
If you don't make any other change to the slow prompt or just change the formatting, does it show us a different version?
All right, so two questions. One is on conflict resolution, one is on formatting. So I've committed this thing in here. All right, let's make sure it's nothing there. Nothing there. All right, so let's go fix this so it looks like it proper code should look. Put commas at the start. Well, I guess I should reformat it. We'll run that. That runs. Okay, I made a change. I have nothing to commit. Okay, so white space, minor formatting changes don't come in as a new version, and they shouldn't. They're irrelevant. They just don't matter. Okay, so they don't appear here in this list. For conflict resolution, what will happen is you'll see the conflict appear. So let's go back over to Grant, and let's make a different change to that same stored procedure. So let's open this up. We're here. Of course, Grant doesn't format stuff. He sucks. What else is in here? There's, oh, sorry, it's not, I gotta refresh my stuff because I'm, keep changing databases and it's not sure. Let's do country code. All right, so we'll run that. It's not formatted, of course, because, you know, such is life with Grant. I've got a conflict now. So what happens is we do the comparison as we should do, and we give you a conflict here. If I changed lots of different objects, you would see them all listed, and you would see, you know, stuff that I had changed that had no conflict, and then you see stuff that's conflict. The same thing would occur if I did a get latest on the other side as well. And I have the option here to keep mine or take theirs, and then refix the code. Here, you know, what I might do is, in fact, note the change that I have, take theirs, and then add my change to it and commit it back. But you know, you have your choice of what to do with it if you have conflicts that occur. In a shared environment, any time that I've made a change, you'll notice in the Object Explorer that I have a little icon here on the side. This tells me that something is in fact changed. If people are in a shared database, I would see that come through over time because we have a polling that goes through to figure out what's changed. In fact, we don't typically poll the source control system, but you know, this allows me to see what's changing. And it does allow me here to, in fact, choose how I want to resolve the conflict. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing is that, like, if you have a conflict that like he made a change and I made a change, they can be resolved automatically. Yeah, they're kind of like unrelated. He made a change from the store call thing.
So unrelated changes. I don't think we do we don't do the merge.
Yeah.
So in C# code or C++ code or anything else, if I had a long document and I added a method to a class, somebody else added a separate method, they're not necessarily conflicting items. Some source control systems will merge those together without telling you because they're just not non-conflicting changes. I think Mercurial will do that. But we don't do that. We don't do that merge. So you would see highlighted where the changes occur. And if this was long, you'd see little bars that would kind of give you a hint where the changes were relative to the lines of code in the system. But we don't do that merge automatically for you.
The thing that you have here is keep mine, keep theirs. I would like to have another option to combine.
Yeah, so talk to that guy right there. See that guy?
Can I just make one comment? I think there's something out of beta now which is to actually call out to a sort of third-party merge tool to allow you to merge stuff together. That's something beta, but the developer who did the work, Anna, is here, so can speak there.
So talk to Ben. He'll find somebody for you. He's the guy. You're the only one that's there, so you get picked on. But yeah, we might add that in. You know, merges get tricky when you do them because you want to be very careful that you're not losing code. But
The ones that I just want them to have the option. Look, on this one, what are you going to do? You're just going to combine the filter and have all the 4 fields.
yeah, so you'd have to decide what to do. You know, I mean, I could just say I'm going to take this. You know, I'm going to take theirs and pull it back down and then remake my change. You know, I mean, I've still got the code window open, right? So I could still just take theirs and do it. Or I could stomp on Grant's code and let him figure it out later. Right, I mean, that's not the best way to do things, just to be clear. What I would really want to do is, I would want to manually fix this myself, because I received the conflict and I realized that there was an issue here. Okay. I can also share tests if I add a test, because they're just stored procedures like everything else. Let me add a new test. Where's my database? So I'll just create a new test here. We'll call it check articles, because I happen to know I have one ready. This test is just, you can see it's just a store procedure. And it has a begin and end. I'm just going to pull this stuff out because I know I have a test here. I add the T-SQL framework code in there. It exists. It says it depends on something, right? It doesn't exist. That's fine. That still works. From a test side, I now have a test here. From the source control side, I can see that I have a test as well. Oops, where's my, refresh this. I'm in the wrong database. Sorry. You got me confused. So I have a test. Try to spell things correctly. That's always good. Fellow developers will appreciate that. If I were to come to the Grant database, you know, assuming he's on his own system, different system, he would in fact see changes I made. Let's go down here. Yeah, so there's my test. Let me get rid of this. So I have a unit test here. If I get these, then I would see those over here as well. I would see them in the add-on in the Grants database, which I think I have to refresh. But they would just be stored procedures that are in other developers' database as well. And you can just manually execute them like any other stored procedure as part of your testing framework. But having tests like this allows you to grow the coverage of your code by having each developer write tests and share them with everybody else, rather than letting just QA or a limited group of people do them. Every developer, as they test their own code, can just create their own test. With source control, version control, they can share that with everybody else. Same thing goes with all the other code that you might have in your database as well. When you use version control, I'm getting it in. Make sure you cover all your code. Now, we cover everything in the database with SQL source control, but there are items that you might need outside of the database that you still want to keep track of. If you do CLR stuff, you want to have that assembly code, not just the create assembly and create function and store procedure, but also the source assembly code, keep that as well. You may want configuration settings and jobs. They may be important to your database, your application running. And for those things, they're easily scripted out of Management Studio, that's easily automated, but store that stuff in version control as well because it becomes important. Lookup data. A lot of us have lookup data in our various systems. We actually handle lookup data for you because it's inside the database. If I go to, let's see, go to my tables. Let's look at our countries. Countries, states, zip codes, there's all kinds of common lookup data that everybody needs. Oh, sorry, wrong database. It's not in Grant's database yet because I didn't source control it. But here, let's do this. In my database, I have all of the list of countries, 249 rows, all the countries that we have out there. You can source control these a number of ways. You could BCP this stuff out and stick a flat file in source control and have everybody pull it down and have a BCP script to pull it in. We try to make it much easier for you. In fact, what we do is allow you to link static data, which would be lookup data. In this case, I know that country codes and RSS feeds actually have data. can save these. If I now go to my source control tab and go to commit my changes, I actually have all of the insert statements for that data that appears. And again, we would run the compare technology and fix things on the other side if there were partial pieces of data in there, but I can commit this stuff. And then all the other developers, for example, Grant, would then see all those changes on his side. So in this case, I'm not going to do the conflict. But I can pull all that lookup data down, and then we'll put all that data in the other database. This is correct. It's Grant's database, and he's got all that data. Okay? As I said, you could do this manually. There's other ways you can do it, but please do it. Make sure you keep all this stuff with it. Administrators, any DBAs in here? You guys make changes to the system sometime? You might alter something like, what would you alter on the system? Go up here. You might come in here and do this, and you say, hey, we think that if we did...
RAM allocation?
Yeah, I could do RAM allocation. I'm not going to do that because that would be bad. You're trying to mess up my machine, aren't you? Let's say I do max stop of 2. I change that. Okay? Because I think it'll help. What I don't want to do is I don't want to come down here and click OK and then walk away. This is what most DBAs do. It's actually what most developers do too. Right? And then when we go to deploy stuff, they end up clicking all over the place trying to remember what they did. Please don't do that. Up here at the top, there's this little button called Script. Please click that button instead. And then click this button down here that says Cancel. It's a really easy procedure. Now I've got code that I can run. More importantly, code I can repeat. I can stick this code in version control as well as a configuration change. And then when I go to do a deployment, I package this up with everything else, and I send this code through and say, this is the thing that I want to happen on the other side. Almost every interface in Windows and SQL Server, anywhere that you're making changes, IIS, there is a hook to script a change with PowerShell, with WMI, with something else. Please, please, please script that stuff and stick it in version control. And make your life much, much easier on the deployment side if you do this stuff. Yes?
Sorry, just something that not clear to me. So with Object-EDL, the confusion I'm getting is, what about when you're version controlling EDL of table structure?
Okay.
Then you have people. Because the data, bar cars, extended, smaller, larger, doesn't that destroy the data? If you download a different table structure, doesn't that destroy the data you have?
If I download a different table structure, will it destroy the data I have? Not necessarily. You can make changes that aren't data destructive.
Right. I mean, if you go from bar car 100, and then you have someone else, bar car 80, for example, you can't, it won't allow you. So how does that work with the version control?
So version control doesn't care what you do, right? Version control is just keeping track of the code that you have. As far as the changes, if I were to try to go from bar char 100 to bar char 80, SQL Server would let me know that I'm potentially causing issues there.
So it's just the code itself of the
Yeah.
structure. So it's the schema code, but it's not applying anything. It's just bringing in and out, checking in, checking out the code itself, the T-SQL that creates the schema.
So the version control system checks in and checks out the code, doesn't care what happens. Okay, in this case, I'm using some version. You can use any other one. As far as applying those changes to your database, you apply them like you would any other change.
On the person.
Yeah, and now the SQL source control added for Redgate gives you the option to apply or not apply changes that potentially could cause issues.
And in that case, it'll fail like any other.
Yeah, just like you ran it, it would just fail like any other change. Yes, yes.
I have a question. Can you create a release script?
Can I create a
Can you create a release script if required?
release script?
Yeah. So you make the changes from version to version and make the release script and once they require the build people.
So I can create a release script. You can create a release script. Right? Will this tool create a release script? Yeah, there actually are add-ins here, and some of the later sessions I think show some of these better. I have a couple of add-ins here that I have published, which will be the packaging piece that we saw earlier for the deployment manager. It will actually package up the entire database for release. I also have schema compare data compare and schema compare right here, which will, these hook into other Redgate tools, Redgate SQL compare and Redgate data compare, generate the scripts for changes. And you can do this comparison against source control, but that's something separate that you would do. So this tool is overlaying on source control system. You have a source control system that's separate. We overlay. We have hooks in here to our comparison tools. You could generate a release script however you choose to do it. SQL compare makes it very easy, but if you have another process that you would like to do, you're welcome to do that. You could go to the history dialog and actually just say, I'm going to take the items listed here that have changed in the last week and bundle those together, check those out of source control. There's any number of ways you could do the release script. The automation piece we have is with SQL compare and data compare, okay? Or deployment managers. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
So in our dev environment, we have our developers, with their own copy of their databases on their local, and they use SQL compare to get the latest updates so that they can be sure they're using what we have in our, whatever we have. So one concept I've been struggling with is when we have new store procedure or something, we want to get that, we don't just want to get the procedure onto the developer's local, but we want it to execute. So for example, the last one we did where you had that configuration change.
Right.
So how would you use source control or SQL compare to make that happen?
So the configuration change, I would need a separate way to do that because we don't do anything outside the database. And do we have any plans for that, Ben? Do you know?
Yeah, we're looking to help you sort of deploy basically the whole configuration.
Okay. So I know we've talked about, we don't do anything like that. We don't do anything outside the database right now. So for those things, I would actually have a subfolder in my source control system, just like, because as a DB, I used to use source control systems like this. You see I have all this stuff here. I would have one that was configuration changes here as well, and I would drop scripts in there. And then as far as how do I release those, I would probably version those as either a version number or a date to allow developers to be aware of what is going where. Now typically, I don't know how to quite do this as a version, but I always branched stuff for release. So whenever I was going to do a release, I would branch that particular code off so that I could just see it as a release. And once we decided to do the release, I would break the branch so that it wasn't linked any longer. I think it's a version when you branch, it's a real branch, it's a broken branch right away. But some source control systems do a shared branch so that anything I change in the branch affects the main line as well. And that's what I would do. But I would actually just track it here and then have a SQL command script or something in there that says run this file, and they would just have to check it out and run stuff that's outside of the database. Okay, stuff like store procedures. If you use SQL source control from Redgate, it automatically applies it. You say get latest and apply that stuff. It runs it. If you're doing it some other way, you have to manually execute those scripts. Okay, and you can provide them with a calling script, or they just have to know open up 1, run it, open up 2, run it, open up 3. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, go back over here. So please make sure you get all your code. You'd be surprised if you forget security code, that kind of stuff. However you store that. Anything that's database level, we capture in SQL source control. Stuff outside the database, you would manually deal with. Best practices for doing this stuff, please use version control everywhere. There's free ones. There's no excuse not to use version control these days. It doesn't have to cost you a dime. Just a little bit of resource for this space. Commit early and commit often. That doesn't mean commit every character or every little change you make. Please do a little minor testing because your fellow developers will appreciate that. But don't make dozens of changes and then commit them all at once. I actually prefer to have a module committed at a time, maybe with its tests, so that I can tell that what changed there. Yes?
What about SSIS packages and SSRS reports?
SSIS packages and SSRS reports. So you can save those out as files, right? Because SSIS package, well, they're both just XML files, essentially. I would stick those in there as well. Now, we don't have a way to source control those because those don't exist inside the database as an object. That's data. I guess maybe the lookup data. Ben, has anybody tried to do SSIS packages or RDLs?
Well, just because they're XML files, so you just do the same you would use for other.
But with static lookup data, if I went to report server or, yeah, he's shaking his head. For those, what I would do is, when I had the SSIS package, export it to a flat file, so, DTSX file, whatever, and then just check that into source control manually.
Yeah, we use
Yeah.
Would it be able to pick up the differences?
Yes.
Yeah, so the source control tools, all the source control tools that I know of do differencing, so they'll tell you what the differences are. Now, the differencing tools can be weird, so like, some of them do look at white space because they do a binary comparison. So if anything moved, like somebody moved the SSIS thing over to bit or made it bigger, that would definitely cause a change. But if they drop something and added something back and maybe ordering changed, it would come back to reception comparison.
The only other thing with the ETSX, because we use the same thing, a lot of the objects inside the ETSX are server specific, that have like objects.
Oh, yeah, so that's true too, yeah.
So watch out for that.
Yeah, so I don't know of a good SSIS compare type tool. Pragmatic Works might have something, you'd have to check.
We use Subversion.
You just use Subversion.
It works, you just gotta watch out, you're gonna get differences all the time because it's specific.
Because it's gonna have your machine, you can save and stuff in it,
Right.
yeah.
As long as you're looking for
But-
that, fill now.
You should version control those things. I know there is some versioning in SQL Server, but I would still just check those in as flat files here. Use tools, please. I know I'm out of time, but use tools where you can. Whether you write them, whether you buy our tools, something else, tools make it easy. And if you've got the tools in place, people are more likely to use it. And then lastly, just spend a few minutes training people. It's not that hard to use version control, but just go over with people how you check stuff in and out. Ideally, what we want to do is get continuous integration, which is where we build automatically and constantly. We feed back issues and problems right away to developers. That's going to be the next talk in here, where they're going to talk about continuous integration with databases. So if you're interested in that, please stick around. And then there are our goals. Please fill out your feedback. We'd love to know what you like, don't like, if you want us to come back or not come back. I covered up the thing. It says feedback. But I've got these slides up on my site at voiceofdba.com, and then I will take questions if you have them. Otherwise, you're welcome to go out, have some coffee, take a break, and have a great day. Thank you very much.